Hi, I'm Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and welcome to the fifth and final of our five-part series as we help the Associated Jewish Federation of Baltimore celebrate its 100th anniversary. And as usual, I'm going to be joined by Beth Goldsmith, chair of the Associated's board of directors. Before turning it over to Beth, I'd like to say a few words about where we are and then kind of get us going. We are out here in this wonderful shaded courtyard in front of the Associated's Park Heights campus, which is, among other things, home to the Baltimore Jewish Community Center. And the center runs a host of programs, including a number that deal with today's theme of justice. They run programs centered on housing and economic empowerment, to name just a few. So we're really pleased to be literally on their front doorstep today. We're going to start our story 100 years ago, maybe a little more, and talk about housing, which has been recognized as a fundamental human right for years and years. Frederick Douglass recognized its centrality when he started what was maybe the first affordable housing for African Americans here in Baltimore and Fells Point on Dallas Street right after the end of the Civil War. In the early 1900s, there was a group in the Jewish community, Baltimore's Jewish community, called the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, formed by Baltimoreans with roots in Russia. And they came together to raise money to help new arrivals get through customs, but then also critically to find temporary and permanent housing to help them make Baltimore their home. Fast forward to the 1930s, and yet another group formed called the Baltimore Jewish Council. And let me read to you a quote from a Rabbi Susterman, who gave remarks at the funeral of a gentleman named Leon Sachs, who was the longtime executive director. Here's what the rabbi said. He said, "If there was one man who was instrumental in bringing together Jews, Catholics, and Protestants and working out a program of cooperation among them in the pursuit of civil rights and social justice, it was Leon Sachs." So obviously a giant in the field doing incredibly important work. The group fought against rules in neighborhoods like Roland Park and Guilford and Homeland that prohibited Jewish Baltimoreans and African American Baltimoreans from buying houses there. They fought against restaurants that were practicing Jim Crow discrimination. And with the NAACP and the Urban League and a group called the Council of Churches, they fought for civil rights in the workplace. That was in the 1940s and the 1950s. In the 1960s, the Associated started another organization called CHI, stood for Comprehensive Housing for the Aged, Inc. We know today as Comprehensive Housing Assistance, Inc., and they got going to address a critical need in the Jewish community, and that was affordable housing for older folks. They started Concord House by Sinai Hospital, and today run a dozen or so communities for older Baltimoreans, mostly in Northwest Baltimore. I'll wrap up going back over to East Baltimore with the Jewish Museum of Maryland. They're involved in an economic development initiative in the Jonestown neighborhood. Many of us know Jonestown for the Shot Tower and the Flag House and the Carroll Museum. It was also the hub of Jewish life in Baltimore for years and years, beginning even in the early 1800s. The Lloyd Street Synagogue started in 1845, and some of us may even remember Corned Beef Row at its height, Lombard Street. Atman's Deli has been there for over 100 years, as well as a number of other institutions. After World War II, Jonestown took a hit, as did many of Baltimore's neighborhoods, as folks left for the suburbs and disinvestment set in. Today, the Jewish Museum, with its partners, other anchor institutions and residents, has developed a revitalization plan and is beginning to implement it. So I think as COVID starts to lift, hopefully this fall, we're going to see some exciting things come out of there. All right, I'm going to turn it over to you, Beth, to talk about yet one more important way that the Associated has addressed injustice here and abroad over its last 100 years.
Thank you, Johns. In addition to fighting against discrimination in housing that we discussed earlier, the Baltimore Jewish Council in 1967 joined with a number of churches and synagogues in an effort called Maryland Project Equality. Back then, Maryland's old boy network was still a real barrier to landing a job or being promoted in a job if you were Jewish or African American or a woman or really anything other than white and Christian and male. In its own words, Project Equality was meant to bridge the gap between preachment and practice. Synagogues and churches for years had been preaching harmony and racial justice, and the project was a means for these groups and their congregations to actually walk the walk and get personally involved. In collaboration, the Maryland Equality Project advocated for things like fair hiring laws, and with its volunteers taking active roles, publicly pressured employers to hire and promote people of all religions, races, and sexes. 10 years later, in 1977, another group was formed, again with leadership and support from the Baltimore Jewish Council and the Associated. This group was the Black Jewish Forum of Baltimore, or BLUES for short. The aim of BLUES was to promote understanding between Baltimore's Black and Jewish communities and pragmatically solve issues of common concern. One of BLUE's most lasting achievements was to bring people together from each community to get to know each other as individuals and break down some of the misconceptions and stereotypes on both sides. Today, we've continued this tradition of bringing racial, ethnic, and religious groups together through programs like Chai's Community Conversations, which brings Jewish and Black women together for dialogue, as well as through school programs that bring students from public and private schools to the Jewish Museum of Maryland, where they learn about the shared histories of these two communities. And finally, we continue to fight against anti-Semitism through the Baltimore Jewish Council's ongoing advocacy at the state and local level, particularly in regard to Holocaust education and hate crimes legislation. Each year, we continue to make sure that we never forget the atrocities of the Holocaust through Holocaust workshops for teachers around the state that are held by the Jewish Museum of Maryland and the BJC. The BJC Speakers Bureau also sends Holocaust survivors and their children to speak at schools and other organizations. In fact, one of our most enduring and successful programs is BJC's Lessons of the Shoah, in which students from public and private schools gather at the John Carroll School in Bel Air to learn about the Holocaust, hear from survivors, and make their personal commitment to combat prejudice and hatred.
Thanks, Beth. I'm going to wrap up with just a few quick words. As we've seen over the last 5 videos, the Associated's 100 years of work here in Baltimore has been tremendous. Fighting for civil rights, fighting against anti-Semitism, fighting for housing as a basic human need, and fighting to provide assistance to our friends and families here in Baltimore with true human dignity. A lot of that work has been done by the professional staff at the Associated, and a lot of that work has been done by volunteers. Volunteers who in the early 1900s organized to help new arrivals into Baltimore, immigrants into their new country, and volunteers most recently who are rolling up their sleeves and helping with economic revitalization in places like Jonestown. If you are one of their volunteers, I'll say thank you on behalf of all of us who love Baltimore and its residents. I'll also say thanks for joining us in this video, and hopefully all of our videos. On behalf of myself and Beth Goldsmith, I'm going to end by humbly suggesting if you are looking for a volunteer opportunity or want to help contribute to the great work that the Associated does, check out their website. We'll put a link at the end. So thanks so much, and here's to another 100 years of the Associated and its great work in Baltimore.